Arapaho law. Share fire, share roof. Mate by that, if both hearts say yes.
We choose nothing tonight. Tonight, we alive.
I found her half frozen in the snow, and from that night on, every sunrise after the storm taught me what it means to live like a man again. Wind River Basin, Wyoming Territory, Wyoming, December 1877. The wind cut like iron filings. I was checking fence along the basalt shelf above the creek, one post at a time, gloves stiff with frost and breath turning white in the dim. Wire sang under my palm, a thin, bitter sound. I liked that work. It was dull in the way a prayer can be dull, steady, honest, unforgiving. The storm had blown down from the Owl Creeks before noon and settled its jaw on the basin by dusk. Snow moved sideways. Canvas would have snapped to ribbons out here if I hadn't braced my wall tent under rock. I heard the land first. Wind, yes, but underneath it a wrongness, a small sound wedded to no pattern I knew. Something that didn't belong to the land. I kept my hand on the post and turned slow. The world was one color and one taste, white and metal. The ridge went blind under blowing grit of ice. Then the sound came again, thinner, like a bone knocking wood from far off. I left the pliers looped on the wire and walked the edge, boots biting through crust. It took time for the shape to crawl out of the storm, a figure where no figure should be. Bent at the waist the way a man bends when he's gut shot, swaying with each step, but too light to be a man. When she lifted her head, the braid moved like a black slash against the snow. Her dress was deerskin, beadwork torn, one shoulder split, bare feet. 10 steps more, and she folded forward without a word, the body still trying to keep a secret it couldn't keep. I didn't draw on her. Habit said rifle first. Something older in me said fire first. I went to one knee, slid my arms under her, and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, which is another way of saying she was alive. Her skin burned with the kind of cold that knows your name. I carried her into the lee of stone where my wall tent hunched under poles and rawhide lashings, canvas grumbling like a tired horse. Inside, the world came back in pieces. Lantern, stovepan glowing dull red, the stink of damp wool and old smoke. I set her on the cot and wrapped my spare blanket over her shoulders. She didn't flinch, didn't ask. Her eyes were open, steady as river stones, but far away in a place I couldn't reach. I put coffee on because a man needs work for his hands when his mind is bucking. I spoke only to the stove. "Stay," I said, as if fire was a thing that could break its word. For about 200 words now I've sounded like the kind of man who tells the truth, too close to his own teeth, and that's not far off. There's a weight that comes from keeping your talk short and your promises shorter. Nights like that just press it deeper. The canvas sighed when the gusts hit, and I thought of other tents, other winters, and faces I couldn't bring back no matter how hard I stared into a flame. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away, and if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. I poured water into the tin cup and held it near her mouth. She took it with both hands and drank as if the fire itself had become water. Close like that I saw the beadwork on the dress Arapaho patterning, if memory served, triangles stepped like mountain shadows, thread darkened where someone had bled on it. The split at the shoulder had not been made by brush or bad luck. "Name?" I asked. Her breath came once, twice. "Tala," she said, the words small and firm at the same time. I gave her mine. "Whit McKenna." She nodded once, as if names were promises we didn't need to shake on. I stoked the fire and felt the old itch between my shoulder blades. That means a man is about to host trouble. I had no proof yet. Out here you learn to trust shapes the way you trust stars, closest thing to law we have. The shape of her dress and the shape of the split and the shape of her leaving tracks with bare feet told the story as well as any court. Snow hit the canvas in handfuls. The poles creaked. She drew the blanket higher. I kept to the far side of the stove and let the quiet decide what came next. Quiet's a better judge than I am. When she shivered, I moved the cot closer to the stove and stood there like a fence post that had figured out how to worry. I found the small sewing kit I keep in a tin with my extra matches, set it near her, and backed off. A woman who's been handled doesn't need more hands. She watched me the way the wounded watch a field, calculating distance, shelter, exits. "You soldier?" she asked at last. "Was," I said. "One word can carry a lot of graves." She looked at the lantern, not at me. "Blue coat once," she said, like a weather report. There was no accusation in it, only an inventory of facts the wind refused to carry away. "I keep fence now," I said, "and cows that don't know my name and don't need to." The fire steadied. Her eyes didn't. They held the quiver of a bow at full draw. I cut a strip from a buffalo robe and laid it near her feet. "For wrapping," I said. "Till we find you, Boots." She didn't say thank you, she didn't need to. She took the strip and bound her feet, slow, careful. Each motion a small treaty with pain. The beads on her dress caught the light and made constellations I did not recognize. "Eat," I said, pushing the pan of beans across the crate we used for a table. She ate like a person who had seen food go missing when a man blinked. When she finished, she set the spoon down and met my eyes for the first time since speaking her name. "Snow take tracks," she said. "Men still find." I don't ask questions when the answers are already marching toward my door. "We'll set more wood under the overhang," I said. "I'll hang a second tarp. Then we sleep in turns." She listened like a scout, not a supplicant. "I keep fire," she said, tapping 2 fingers on the stove rim. The gesture had more dignity in it than any prayer I'd heard in a church. I pulled my coat off and set it around her shoulders. Pride cuts, but cold kills. She let it stay. Outside, the wind found another gear. The whole basin leaned into it, and the canvas shook with a noise like bones in a bag. Years fall off a man in weather like that, years he didn't want back. I checked the rifle and leaned it within reach. She noticed. Her mouth set, not hard, just decided. "I'm not your trouble," she said. "I know," I said, "but trouble likes company." We spoke no more. Night does this thing where it comes all at once when there's snow, no twilight to soften the blow. The lantern threw a coin of light onto the tent roof, and the rest of it belonged to Wyoming. I could feel the riders my mind had invented moving across the ridges. I could also feel the way the tent changed with a second breath inside it. There's a rule I've learned. The first hour with a stranger decides the next year. It's not a law. Laws need judges. It's just a working truth. She lay on her side nearest the stove, blanket tight under her chin, my coat over that, her braids spilled like a river that had mislaid its bed. I sat at the flap with the rifle upright and my back to the pole. When the fire dropped its voice, I fed it. When it grew proud, I starved it back to steady. The work kept my hands from trying to dig the past out of a ground that had frozen over for good reason. At some point the wind forgot about us. That's how it felt anyway. The tent stopped shuddering, and the night developed ears. I heard every click the stove made, every shift of her weight, every lie the boards told as they settled. I'd have said the world held its breath if I believed the world ever breathed for a man like me. "Wit," she said in the near dark, making my name sound like a thing she meant to keep track of. "Yeah." "Sacred law," she said. "Arapaho. Share fire, share roof." She paused. "Mate by that, if we choose." She left the last part hanging like a rope you're not sure you can trust. The tent waited with us. "We choose nothing tonight," I said. "Tonight we alive." "Yes," she said. The word had bones in it. I listened to her breathing change shallower, slower, and let time do what it does to a man who's given up believing in it. Went past me without asking permission. When the lantern died, I let it. There was enough light from the stove to keep the ghosts honest. Morning would make claims, men would too. For now there was a woman alive who would have been dead on the wire if not for a choice I didn't remember making until after I'd made it. Some choices are like that. You find them already living in your hands. The basin woke mean and bright, a kind of cruel mercy that comes after a night of noise. I stepped out to a world shaved, clean ridges blue as old steel, snow crust blinking in hard light. The wind had calmed to a knife you could at least see coming. I walked the line above the creek and found our tracks half swallowed, the rest blown thin like old scars. A set of hoof cuts tracked along the high edge and dropped to the cottonwood snags by the bend. Not mine. Inside, Tala had the stove talking in a more civilized voice. My coat still hung on her shoulders. She'd braided her hair tighter and tied the end with a strip of rawhide. The blanket I'd given her had been restitched where it tore, clean work with small, neat bites, hands that wasted nothing. "You hungry?" I asked. She tilted her head at the pan. "Beans get smaller when a man stares too long," she said, almost dry. We ate without talk. The work would have time for words, and I didn't like spending when I hadn't earned. After we cleaned the pan, I pulled on gloves. "Wood?" I said. "Traps," she answered, tapping 2 fingers against her thigh and then toward the draw. She'd found my coil of twine and a handful of sticks and was already looping a snare the way you tie a thought to a post firm but not cruel. "Arapaho make do. I've seen it. It's the difference between a night that keeps you and a night that breaks you." We set 4 loops in the brush near the willow fringe, then worked downstream to where the creek shouldered into a narrow bank. That's where I saw the shine iron teeth, wrong half snowed but new. A steel trap. Not mine, not hers, not a thing a man uses unless he likes the sound meat makes when it stops struggling. Tala froze first, then crouched, palm hovering above the spring as if asking it what kind of man it served. "Traitor?" she said. "Could be," I said. "Could be worse. Could be a man who wants to keep us from the water." I disarmed the thing with a stick and a curse. She watched where my eyes went afterward, not at the trap, but at the edges of the world. She noticed everything that could kill us, and then the things that would pretend they couldn't until it was too late. On the walk back she asked about the blue coat again, not as accusation but as a carpenter checks the seam before she trusts it with weight. I gave her the short version. Scout. Wrong orders. Men not buried where they should be. "I left that life," I said. "It didn't leave me." She nodded. Some people make mercy by nodding and not asking for receipts. By afternoon we had the tarp doubled on the west side, a windbreak built of brush and snow blocks, and a second cot rigged from saplings lashed with rawhide. I set it opposite mine with the stove between. Privacy's not a word the West thinks in, but I do what I can to make room a woman can breathe without feeling measured. She noticed. "You build wall," she said. "Not to keep out, to give choice." "You want the door side?" I asked. She shook her head. "You hear first. I see first." "Good." We worked until the light went gold in that way it does, when the dust under the snow gets up and tries to turn the world into memory. Firelight made a room from canvas and air, and that room made a kind of treaty 2 people could live under for a night. Only then did she speak the words I knew were coming. "Arapaho law," she said. "Sacred the fire. Share it with a man and sleep under his roof. You belong together if both hearts say yes." She paused. "I won't use law to chain you. Chains do not make a mate." "I won't use kindness to buy you," I said. "Trades for goods, not souls." They had goad, the dale and flashed and road sea. Her mouth moved a fraction toward something that wasn't a smile but had been near one once. "Good," she said. "We did small things then, the kind that set a life in place without telling it what to be." She stitched the tear at her shoulder and I threaded a new guy line through the ridge seam. When the fire settled, I laid my Winchester across my knees and checked the action by feel. She watched my hands, not the gun. "Men who put traps by water," she said after a while. "They talk loud or walk quiet?" "Both," I said. "They come loud and leave quiet." The first night of turns we kept to the plan as if a judge had written it. She took the midwatch with a stick for the stove, and my old Navy pistol unloaded in her lap so her hand could learn its weight without borrowing its sins. I dozed with one eye open, which isn't a figure of speech if you've lived the life I have. Toward morning, a sound at the tarp brought me up with the rifle in my hands and a word on my tongue that could have meant halt or hell depending how a man heard it. Tala's hand landed on my forearm, light, certain. "Fox," she whispered. She was right. The trotting sound moved past with that particular arrogance only a well-fed thief has. We let it go. Not every trespass deserves court. At first light, I went to the creek to fill the bucket. The sky had the look of more weather later, and the air carried news from the south. Smoke, distant, not pine. Greasewood or juniper, burned in a hurry. On the bank I found prints from a shod horse that had waited a long time under cottonwood. Men waiting look heavier. The snow knew it. Back at camp I found Tala sitting on her cot, feet wrapped in the buffalo strip, my coat on her shoulders, the tin cup steaming in her hands. The line of her back had changed. Not a curl inward like fear, but a straightening like a decision. "If I stay," she said, "it is not by law alone. It is because I choose your fire." She looked up then and let the words hit square. "And you choose mine." There's a thing a man can do with his face when he agrees to terms he might not deserve but wants to stand good for anyway. I did that thing. "You'll have a say in everything," I said. "Where we set lines, when we move stock, what we fight for." Her eyes settled. "And what we do not fight for," she said, softer. "We checked the snares at noon and found 2 rabbits caught clean." She taught me a knot I should have known years ago. I taught her how to set wire higher when the snow cakes up and makes every small thing seem taller. Back in camp, we hung the meat and let the fat spit its hymn in the pan. Peace has a sound if you listen crooked at it. Dusk brought the riders I'd promised myself wouldn't come. 2 shapes on the far shelf. Not close, not careless. One wore a hat brim cut square the way freighters do. The other slouched like a man in debt to gravity. They didn't turn their heads toward us, which is how I knew they'd already done that, and were pretending not to. We built no more fire that night than we needed to cook and melt snow. I put the lantern out early and let the stove be our sun. Tala sat cross-legged with the pistol, now loaded, her finger straight where it should be. I said nothing. Teaching ends where trust begins. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. By the 3rd morning the light over Wind River looked cleaner, but the quiet had teeth. That kind of stillness means somebody's waiting for you to step outside. I saddled the mare early, checked the line along the ridge, and found the first sign we weren't alone. The reins I'd left coiled on a fence post were gone. Cut, not taken. The knife had been short and dull, the kind of tool a man uses when he's too sure of himself to sharpen his blade. When I came back, Tala was crouched near the stove, rolling a strip of hide between her palms. "Horse?" she asked. "Someone cut my lead rope." "Someone cut my lead rope." She didn't flinch. "Traitor? Could be. Or a man who works for the law but spends more time in a bottle than a church." She looked up. "Fort Washakie man?" I nodded. The name came easy enough. Deputy Rudd. A drinker, part-time gambler, full-time coward. He'd been warned out of Rawlins 2 years back after selling whiskey to a band of Shoshone boys and leaving one dead in the snow. The kind who made trouble into a profession. "Men like that," I said, "don't come to buy. Then we make ready." She said it as if she'd just announced the weather. No tremor, no plea. She stood, still wearing my coat, and tied her braid tight. Then she pulled a short carbine from where I'd hung it behind the flap. "Teach me, is not likes me, and forby of very, with formant." The words carried the weight of her law and mine together. I checked the chamber, made sure the gun was clean, and handed it over butt first. "Dry fire," I said. "Squeeze, don't jerk. Breath in, half out, then press." She aimed at the post. The motion was smooth, instinctive. When she clicked the trigger, she didn't flinch. I had seen raw recruits do worse on the best of days. "Good," I said, "but this stays a last choice." She lowered the gun. "For you too?" I met her eyes. "Always." Esther's, very palo. Was Deverett Day. The day passed in slow work. We packed supplies into the hollow under the rock shelf, moved the tent back 10 yards to keep the firelight hidden, and stretched a second tarp for smoke. Every motion carried the rhythm of partnership. She cut cordage while I dug a shallow trench for runoff. When the wind shifted, she stopped and raised her head like a doe scenting wolves. I froze too. That's how you know you've learned to share danger. By dusk, tracks showed again 3 horses coming from the south, turning toward the ridge where the creek bent. Same number as the riders from before, maybe the same men. I felt the old ache in my chest where scars grow tight in cold weather. We ate quick. The stew was thin, but the silence around it was thick. Tala sat cross-legged by the stove, the pistol laid across her knees. "They come tonight?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe they're watching to see what kind of man stays in a storm with a woman, not his kin." "And what kind of woman stays," she added. "That too." When the light died, we set our watches. She took first turn. I lay back on my cot, half awake, listening to the stove tick and the wind move through the cottonwoods. The night smelled of iron and juniper and far-off smoke. Around midnight her voice came low. "Horse!" I was up before the word was done. Outside, the snow carried faint shapes, riders on the far side of the creek, one lantern flickering yellow. They weren't close enough to shoot, but close enough to count. "They don't hide," she whispered. "They don't need to," I said. "They think we're weak." She glanced at me. "We?" I nodded. "We." The lantern stayed another minute, then vanished into the dark. But the sound of hoofbeats took longer to die. When it did, I could still feel the ground humming beneath my boots. Back inside, she sat by the fire, her hands trembling only after the danger passed. "Tomorrow," she said. "We move?" "No," I told her. "We fortify." She frowned slightly. "You want fight?" "I want choice. Moving means running blind. We know this ground. Let them come." She studied me for a long time before speaking again. "Then I fight with you." "I said I'd keep you safe." Her voice sharpened. "And I said I am not behind you. I stand beside." I had no answer better than respect. So I nodded once and handed her the rifle. "Then learn this one too." We practiced until the fire burned low, each click of the empty chamber a heartbeat echoing off the canvas. When she aimed, she breathed through her nose, steady, sure. By the last round of dry fire, I realized she was teaching me something too, that fear loses its footing when you share it. Just before dawn, I wrapped the horse's hooves with cloth to muffle sound, then checked the traps. One rabbit, caught clean. She skinned it without being asked. The smell of meat and coffee mixed with the scent of snow burning on the stove's lid. A man could almost mistake that for peace. I didn't. Peace never lasts out here. Sunrise came thin and white, the kind that makes a man squint harder than the snow. We moved slow, every step measured from habit and caution. Quartering the ridge, we set small alarms, trip strings and bells. Nothing fancy, just enough to make a rider think twice before sweeping in like a thunderhead. I stashed the spare saddles so no one could ride off with ours if they managed to cut them loose again. Tala braided more hides into a thicker rope and ran it through a loop beneath the rock shelf, an improvised winch, the kind you use when you have time and dirt and hands that don't mind blisters. By noon the sky was pale and the ridge hummed with cold. Tracks came again, but closer, 3 horses, then 2 more, like reeds bending in a single wind. They hugged the low line and kept their heads down. Whoever rode them knew the land. That told me more than the color of their coats. This was not a spur-of-the-moment rustle. These men had a purpose. They made camp on the opposite bank, out of sight but within earshot. I watched them through a slit in the tarp. Faces I could not make out, but their posture was easy, in a way dangerous. Men often are too comfortable, like the world belonged to them on credit. One of them came forward later with a white rag tied to his saddle horn. A flag, I thought, but it was a bottle, empty now. They were playing at negotiation like children playing at war. That afternoon a shadow peeled off the distant line and walked to the creek alone, long coat, hat pulled low. He was the sort who tries to seem smaller than the trouble he brings. I crawled to the lip of the ridge with Tala at my shoulder. She had the rifle across her lap, and the look of a woman who'd decided the world owed her nothing, and she'd take no more of what it tried to give. "Talk to him?" she mouthed. "No," I said. Watch. He paused at the water and cupped his hands. He drank, slow and careful, the way a man enjoys something he knows he might lose. Then he spat, wiped his mouth with a gloved hand, and scanned the far bank. His eyes swept the ridge and settled, for a second, on the tent where a strip of smoke curled. He smiled without humor, an oval cut from the same dull blade that cut my reins. Back at camp, he called out in a voice made of train whistles and cheap brass, "You got any whiskey to trade? I got coin and a taste for company." Tala's jaw tightened. I could have answered. Instead, I let the smoke curl higher and the stew boil low. We kept quiet, like a pair of rocks, pretending to be a bluff. Evening crept in, and with it a wind that carried a dozen small insults, a loose branch clapping the tarp, a dog barking at the far edge of town, a train's distant siren moaning like a promise broken. The man on the bank left, and the 5 riders rode off, as if whatever they'd intended was no longer worth the bother. Maybe they'd sent men elsewhere to threaten some other ranch. Maybe they'd go back to Fort Washakie with their tails between their legs. Maybe not. We slept that night with our boots within reach. The rifle leaned against the cot like a guest that would not sleep. Tala hummed a tune I did not know. The notes were short, like the way she cut her words, and for a moment they filled the tent like warm water. I thought about the man at the creek, and the way his smile carried no kindness, just a ledger of debts he expected others to pay. In the morning he came again, but this time with a horse tied and a swagger that said he'd been paid in rumors. He stepped into the shallows and lifted his face to the sky like a man claiming territory he hadn't earned. "You folks in need of law?" he called, eyes shifting toward the tent. Tala did not answer. Neither did I. I had a mind toward fewer words and actions that counted. I pulled my coat tighter and stood. "Deputy Rudd," I said, naming the man more like a fact than a greeting. "You lot lost?" He blinked slow. "Lost? Naw. Just looking to see what a storm leaves. Maybe pick up a saddle or two." The grin showed teeth that had been afraid of soap and brave of whiskey. "You come alone," I observed. He laughed. "I always come with myself. That's all a man needs." He took another step, and I saw his hand twitch to his holster. He wanted to make us smaller with a gesture. Tala put the rifle across her knees, and the gun looked heavier for being held by someone who would use it right, not throw it like a threat. "We got our hands full," she said. "You best go on." He stepped closer. His shadow fell over the stove, then over the map of the land on the table. "Ain't much a man can do when the law gets thirsty," he said. "Sometimes a little persuasion, a little pay to the right folks' homes, change hands. Thanks for watching, and in the des to the sex. And the 9 Amid made a paid, 7 no's with you more." That was his offer in a nutshell. Coin and the tidy theft of other people's will. Wind cut his words like wire. I set my jaw like a man setting a plow. "If you want trouble, you can take it up the creek," I said. "If you want peace, you can ride back to Washakie and tell whatever god you pray to that some folks don't sell." He spat. "You think you can stand up to us?" His men's horses shifted, and the sound was like a prelude to the kind of ugliness that bends the neck. I looked at Tala. She met me without flinching. There was no bravado in that look, only the cold clarity of someone who had measured the worst and found it smaller than the thing you do to protect what's yours. "We can," she said. Rudd hesitated like a gambler who'd turned up a bad card. He stepped back then, the grin falling from his face with the ease of a glove taken off. He tipped his hat half in mockery and rode away. The others followed, but the sound of their departure did not carry relief. It carried the knowledge that men like Rudd rarely leave without a promise to return. We watched until the dust swallowed them. Only then did Tala let herself exhale. She wiped her hands on her coat and looked at me as if we'd both turned the page on an ugly line. "You sure you want to stay?" she asked, voice soft as the thaw. I thought of the reins cut from the post, the ledger of my life written in scratches on split wood, and the quiet in the night that had teeth. I thought of the choice I'd made months ago when I decided not to leave, when the land had kept 1 foot in my shadow and the rest in the horizon. I thought of how, out here, a man's promises are the only things that age like fine leather. Yes, I said. For now. We make it so they know it'll cost them. She smiled then, a small thing but true. Then, we keep watch. So we kept watch. And the ridge kept its secrets. And the river ran like a wound healed enough to scar. Outside, the world kept testing the edges of us, morning by morning. But inside that canvas, the rhythm of two people standing side by side made a kind of answer. Whoever came to take what wasn't theirs would find the ground already defended by more than a single gun or a single man. They would find a pair who'd learned how to share danger, and that, as any man worth his name knows, is sometimes the only kind of strength left in a world that asks you to be small. Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. Your body will thank you. The first shot came 2 days later, just as the sun broke over the ridge. It wasn't meant to hit. It was meant to speak. A bullet through canvas says, "We found you." I rolled from the cot, grabbed the rifle, and cut the stove's draft to kill the light. Tala was already crawling toward the back flap, pistol in hand. 3, she whispered. Same as before. The second shot hit the ridgepole, showering snow and splinters. Out the back, I said. We slipped into the narrow cut behind the camp where the wind had carved a shallow trench through ice and rock. That canyon was death to horses and men who didn't know its tricks, but I'd been mapping it for weeks. The ice formed a slick shelf over hard stone, and a thin stream ran beneath like a whisper. We crouched behind a fallen log. "You still want to stand beside me?" I asked. I said stand, she said, not hide. She was right. I grinned, despite the tension. Then we make them work for it. The plan came quick. We smeared rabbit fat on the slickest part of the ice, stretched a rawhide line low across the choke point, and waited. Tala watched the ridge while I covered the trail leading down. The first rider appeared as a shadow on the snow, rifle drawn. Behind him came 2 more, one with a star pinned crooked on his vest, Deputy Rudd. Even at this distance, I knew that slouch. He called out, "McKenna, got a warrant for you. Harboring an Indian woman, that's federal business." His voice had the swagger of a man who believed in paper more than principle. I answered flat. "Frontier justice is keeping people breathing, Deputy. You got no paper for that." He laughed. "You know what else keeps people breathing? Knowing when to surrender." The lead rider started down the slope, careful, testing the ground. The rawhide held. The second followed. When the third moved in, his horse hit the fat, slick stone and went down hard, screaming. The others jerked back, cursing. I fired once, aiming for the snow at their feet. Warning, not war. They fired back anyway. The canyon erupted in thunder. Tala fired next, her shot clipping the ice near Rudd's boot. He stumbled, dropped to one knee. She didn't fire again, just held her sight steady. The message was enough. The other men hesitated, realized this wasn't easy prey, and pulled back toward the ridge. Rudd shouted, "You'll hang for this, McKenna." "Then make sure the rope's clean," I yelled, and sent one more round into the snow near his horse. That broke them. They turned tail, dragging the fallen man between them, disappearing into the glare. Silence fell like snow. My hands shook only after it was done. Tala lowered her gun, breathing hard. "They come again?" "Maybe," I said, "but not today." "And a comdies as of dear bin of res. And a set, never waiter." She stared at the blood streak melting across the ice. "You could kill," she said quietly. "I could," I said, "but I'd rather live." She nodded, then added, "We both live." We went back to the tent and found 2 holes through the canvas and 1 pot shattered. Small prices. The fire went up again, cautious but warm. We patched the roof with spare cloth, worked in silence, and ate what was left of the stew. When darkness settled, the canyon gleamed outside, like glass laid over all our mistakes. Later she touched my sleeve. "Your hands," she said, shaking. "It stops," I told her. "Mine too," she said. "That stops also." She reached across the narrow space between us and set her hand over mine. Her palm was rough from the day's work, warm from the stove. We stayed like that a long time, not lovers, not strangers, just two souls catching their breath in a place that had tried hard to take it away. If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. By the time the thaw began, the snow had retreated into the gullies like an old enemy too tired to fight. The land smelled of wet earth and juniper. Our camp looked battered but alive, patched canvas, stacked wood, a small gate I'd built from cut pine. Tala stood beside it, her braid shorter now where fire had singed the end during the fight. She traced a symbol into the gatepost with a burned stick, 2 crossing lines, Arapaho for joined paths. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. "You planning to move on when it warms?" I asked. She looked at the valley. "A woman can walk, but she always carries the place that saved her." "Then this place is half yours," I said. She smiled, not wide, just honest. "And half yours." We spent the next days working like settlers who believed spring was a promise and not a trap. We hauled stones for a new hearth, cleared brush, and planted the first posts for what might one day be a cabin. My shoulder burned, but I didn't mind. The ache meant life. Sometimes she'd sing while she worked low, almost humming. The words weren't mine to know, but they bent the air different. I'd heard hymns and drinking songs and marching tunes, but never one that made silence sound so full. At night, we sat by the stove and talked little. Some silences don't need filling. The crackle of kindling, the pop of resin in the pine. It was enough. Sometimes she'd mend the leather on my gloves while I whittled handles for tools we didn't yet have need of. We were building toward something unseen but certain, like 2 trees growing toward the same light. One morning a thawed trickle began to run beneath the rock shelf, singing in its own small voice. She said the river would wake soon, and when it did, it would come all at once, fierce, joyful, dangerous. I knew she was right. Spring never tiptoes in the high country. It kicks down the door. The day before the first real melt, I found her sitting on the rise above camp, watching the horizon burn blue. Her coat hung loose, the braid dark against her shoulder. I sat beside her without a word. The quiet between us had changed. It no longer held fear, just understanding. "You still fear the blue coat?" she asked that evening as the sun dipped red over the hills. I thought about it. Not the coat, the man inside it. His no-be-as actions. Tell redder. "You are not him now." "No," I said. "But he still rides behind my eyes." She nodded. "Then let him rest. The dead don't need to keep your reins." Her words landed where sermons fail. I didn't answer, but I slept better that night. In the morning, she brewed coffee over the coals, the smell winding through the camp like memory. I caught her watching me, not with question, but with quiet measure, like she was making sure the world had finally stopped taking more than it gave. A hawk's cry broke the stillness, and both of us looked up. The thaw had begun in earnest. Ice cracked on the river, slow silver plates turning under a thin sun. She smiled faintly. "Water runs again," she said. I nodded. "Then we'd best follow it." For 3 days we worked the land harder than ever, fixing the corral, dragging branches to dry, setting the stones for what would be the hearth. She was tireless, though her hands were rough and blistered. I tried to tell her to rest, but she just laughed. "When the work ends, the cold returns," she said. It was on the 4th day that I caught myself humming her song. She heard and turned, surprised. "You steal my tune," she said, teasing. "Borrow," I corrected. "Then keep it. Maybe it brings luck. I'll take what I can get." That night the moon came up fat and bright over the ridge, washing the camp in silver. She leaned back against a log, eyes half closed, hair loose from its braid. "In my mother's tongue," she said softly, "moon means keeper of time. She sees the truth of us." "What's she see now?" I asked. "That you are trying to forget how to be alone." She wasn't wrong. There's a kind of loneliness that wears a man's skin like frost, thin, invisible, but deadly if you let it linger. Tala had burned it off without ever trying to. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. A week later, we rode to the ridge above the river. Ice floated downstream in slow silver plates. She reined her horse beside mine and looked east. Snow gone, she said.